what originally made you pursue your career in sports broadcasting? Like, when did you see it as a start to be a profession or your future career path?
Yeah. Well, I knew Owen from a very early age, actually. I obviously my dad was a high school basketball coach, and growing up with three brothers, and growing up with a ton of kids, including your relatives in the neighborhood, and everybody was interested in sports. And back in those days, we didn't have many other options. We had to get outside and play, and so when I was, playing wiffle ball or kickball or football or whatever the sport, we had a basketball hoop out in our driveway. I was already not only playing in the games, but calling the games. And, once I started watching a little more sports on TV, I realized, well, that could be a career path for me. And so that's really all that I've ever wanted to do, and all that I pursued. Even from an early age, I got great encouragement in North Syracuse from my teachers and from other people, friends of friends that were in local news and sports that gave me some really good advice. And so I was able to dive into the local sports scene even while I was still in high school, and get a head start, doing internships and working on different sports events around town just as a runner and pulling cables. And then eventually from there, I was, earned an opportunity to get on the air and start calling play by play. And I realized that was more of my calling than being in the studio or being an analyst or being a sideline. So that's what I pursued with gusto as I got a little older.
Just walk me through more of the career path that you took and kind of the key steps that really led to where you are now.
Yeah. So not only was my dad, Lenny, the basketball coach in the wintertime, but he worked in the press box for fall sports and for spring sports at CNS. And so he would operate the clock with a couple of other guys in the press box, and I was the public address announcer. So even, calling football games in the fall, sort of as the PA announcer, but also sprinkling in some play by play, and doing the same thing during basketball season when I wasn't practicing or playing. But I was encouraged to be an English major, which was a great idea. Do a lot of reading and writing and public speaking classes, and take care of all that in school, and then work on the broadcasting side of things at night and on weekends. And so that's what I would do even while I was still in high school, or then when I went away to college to Lafayette to play basketball. Coming home in the summertime, I would jump right back into the kind of the local scene, and then coming back to Newhouse for grad school was a big step, and allowed me to start working a lot on Syracuse University sports, whether it was at WAER. I got a job locally at WSYR covering news. The news side was actually where I got my first paying gigs. And then when I graduated, I had the opportunity to get into local radio as sports director, news director, disc jockey, doing it all. And that's when I really started calling sports kind of full time. We did local college at Cortland State. I was down in Homer, New York, is where the radio station was, WXHC. Started calling college football, college basketball. We did all kinds of high school sports locally, and that's where I first really started getting a lot more repetitions.
How did all those internships, networking, or the mentors that you had at Syracuse or other places, how did all those help you out when you first started?
Yeah, so that's, I like to say over the course of my career, I don't think I've ever been hired by a stranger. It's still like any other business, a people business, and the contacts you make and the networks that you make. So for me, probably the most significant thing from my Syracuse experience was just the people I met, and through that, the people that they met. And so immediately I was able to tap into people like Marv Albert and Bob Costas and Mike Tirico and Sean McDonough and all those kinds of guys. for advice, just to be able, to use as sounding boards. And, the Syracuse contacts really have been huge. It's kind of everywhere in our industry, as you probably already know, that the Syracuse Mafia is a prominent one. And so it's just kind of through those types of relationships that I was able to, develop more and more relationships with other people in the industry.
What are the skills that you think are most important for a successful play-by-play broadcaster?
Yeah, I always tell young folks never say no for no particular reason. Anytime you have an opportunity to call games or be around games, work in the industry, that is one of the most significant skills I think is to be a good teammate. Um, because again, you're usually getting hired by people or friends of friends, and positive word of mouth is huge. Thing is, it's all about repetitions, and it's all about sort of self scouting. I would sit, in the bleachers at Syracuse Chiefs games or at high school lacrosse games. Um, and just back in those days, you couldn't do it on your phone. You had to carry a tape recorder around with you and just tape myself calling games, sitting up in the cheap seats where nobody really could hear me and just calling games game after game. I'd sit in front of the TV and, watch any kind of sport, just to get my foot in the door, to be able to call tennis, call golf. Even, while I was fans of those, I never played them at a high level, but you develop a cadence, you develop a contour, you learn the different language of each of the sports, the different slang used in each of the sports, which is huge as a play-by-play announcer. And you just continue to get better, and you listen to what the pros are doing, and then you kind of use your own voice. I'd turn the volume down and then start call a quarter of a football game in my tone and my inflection and my intonation, and just kind of work on my skills that way.
You think of any moment where something kind of went unexpected and you guys kind of had to blow out the fire or something like that on air?
Well, that's the beauty of sports. It's still the great unknown out there, and you never know which way things are going to turn. We had just last night, Texas was leading Alabama 4-0 after the first inning, and they had beaten them pretty good the night before, and it looked like Texas was on its way to another rout. And boom, the game just turned in an instant, and we had to totally shift gears. Alabama had a 6-run second inning and took charge of the game. And it's those kind of momentum swings. And all of a sudden, we're telling a lot of stories about Texas because they're winning big, to totally shifting now. Okay, well, now we're telling all these stories about Alabama because they have become the significant story. And they play in a stadium called the Rhodes House. And it's one of the most raucous in college softball and one of the toughest places to play. And suddenly this 4,000 people that had been pretty quiet, just came alive, and they were an organism that had become a part of the game. And so you have to be ready to shift gears and be prepared to tell all kinds of different stories in a moment's notice when the game changes.
And during a shift like that, how can you balance all the action that you're seeing on the diamonds or on the field, on the court, between telling the story or the story
Yeah.
of the game?
I think that's the thing sometimes, that fans that love to only hear about their home team and only love to hear nice things about their home team. I think they don't really understand, especially on a national broadcast. We're not here to be 50-50 and spend half the time talking about Texas and half the time talking about Alabama. We're here to tell the story of the game. And if it's, Texas up big, obviously we're going to be saying a lot of things about Texas, and maybe not so many nice things about Alabama. What are they doing wrong? How do they get back into this game? And vice versa. So, that there's kind of that sort of what we call not only contour to your voice. You're probably not going to sound the same in the bottom of the seventh as you do in the top of the first. You want to echo the emotion of the moment, But there's also contour to your storytelling and to, when you drop in certain nuggets of information as the game goes along and getting a feel for what are the stories to tell at any given time and what are the great stats to drop in there at any given time.
Tell me, how exactly do you prepare for the broadcasts? What does your prep routine look like?
Well, here's my game board from last night. So I like to obviously here's a game, and I keep my own scorebook for example, for baseball and softball. I have the defense up here so I can find where the defenders are on the field quickly if I need a name. And then I have over here just information about the team, about the head coach. Down here, I may have more big picture stories like a recap of game one. Texas is returning 6 starters from their national championship team, a little bit of information on their championship team. Last April, they actually weren't very good and then got it together in May. So they're trying to avoid another April slump. And so I write down all kinds of nuggets. I'll write down information here. Maybe somebody's got a 5 or 6 game hitting streak. Somebody else maybe 0 for their last 12, things like that, just so I have that in front of me if I need that kind of information. And then I also always have a game board of, like here's my Texas game board with information on all the different players, updated stats, awards, honors that they've won, things like that. So we can, and then any stories that we get from finding them on the internet or talking to them in person. You try and go down to the field pregame to say hello to folks, make sure nobody is injured or got sick overnight or things like that. It's constant, what I call foraging for information, and there's so much out there now on the internet that a big part of my job pregame is with our production crew is, hey, what are the big story? What are the top 5 things we definitely want to get in to really tell the story, set up the story, and then be ready if the story shifts in a new direction once the game gets underway.
And of course, obviously, called many different sports, and I know you were the first female on an NFL broadcast.
Mm.
Congratulations to that accolade. That is incredible. That is so phenomenal. I'll share what that experience was like. Tell me all about being in the booth during that broadcast.
Yeah, that was kind of one of those dream come true moments as a kid, watching the NFL all the time. I had a chance to do, the first NBA game nationally as a female too, and growing up watching, Michael Jordan was, in my wheelhouse as a youngster. Just those are such special moments, and Monday Night Football, it's interesting, Owen, when you're in it, you're still kind of locked in on your own game preparation. You understand it's going to be a big deal. You may have to do more radio and newspaper and TV interviews. There may be a lot more eyeballs on you, but um, my preparation really doesn't change whether it's an NFL game or an NBA game or a college softball game. I kind of have my way of doing things. My preparation really doesn't alter. But then when you're in the booth, you get there. It was in Denver, and it was such a cool weekend to be a part of, and coach interviews and player interviews, and Rex Ryan was just spectacular. He knew the significance of the moment, and he was such a great team player. He wanted to learn everything he could because he was new to the business. He knew the football side of it, and he worked really hard on learning the TV side of things. And I thought that was really cool. And just our whole crew, it was a great moment. We nailed it. We were at our best when we needed to be as a team, and so that was a real memorable moment. And afterwards, maybe you take a breath and you sort of take a look around and you see how significant it was for a lot of women in our industry, a lot of young boys and girls that could see sort of, hey, I was just a kid with a dream years prior, and worked hard to earn that opportunity. And so that, hopefully anybody that wants to do this um, has a path now if they want to follow it or to create their own to get into those big kind of games themselves.
Was definitely uplifting to see your path, reading your path and all the games you've been able to call. And I'm sure you've had a lot of memories as well. So what is your most memorable moment beyond the mic?
It's been a great ride. It's been a lot of fun. But you can appreciate this with your family from good old North Syracuse, New York, and the old neighborhood. Brianna Stewart is from my high school, CNS, and so as fortune and fate would have it, in 2016, when Stewie was a senior at UConn and trying to win a fourth straight national championship, it was none other than our Syracuse Orange that reached the finals to try and take them down. And so I had a chance to call the Final Four that year. And it was just an incredible sort of full circle moment for me to be able to watch Stewie playing against Syracuse, and so many of the Syracuse alums that I grew up spending summers with at Manley Fieldhouse playing pickup games. To see all of them, and to be a part of that moment, and to put my voice on Stewie's capper in her fourth national championship was a real highlight for me, for sure.
Sounds like you've had a great path, and I definitely enjoy reading all about it. So, to finish things off, what is one piece of advice that you can give somebody like me who's trying to enter the industry?
Oh man, what is the one piece of advice? Whew. I think probably the big thing is to just be resilient. There are ups and downs in this career path that we choose. So you have to be resilient. You have to be ready to bounce back at a moment's notice. You have to stay vigilant in your networking, and you always have to be a great teammate and be a lot of fun to be around, so that people will want to work with you, and your word of mouth uh, spreads rapidly and spreads positively.
Definitely. As a senior, I got 1 month left going into my final stretch before grad school and everything. So, one specific thing that you think I should be focusing on right now?
Oof. It always comes back to getting as many repetitions as you possibly can in a lot of different sports, and I think that's the other big key is the versatility of a play-by-play announcer, but also, for somebody like me, my first foot in the door was on the news side of things.
Yeah.
So to be versatile and be ready to go in any direction just to get your foot in the door, start meeting people, and start getting as much repetition as you can.
That's perfect advice. And that's exactly what I'm doing. Getting as my foot in the door and calling as many games as possible. Well, thank you, Beth. I really do appreciate it. This has been incredibly helpful, and I look forward to staying in touch. Your insight has been amazing. It means a lot to me to have been able to connect and talk to somebody who's been as successful as you are. So, thank you very much.
Yeah, keep me posted on how things go, and best of luck to you, Owen, and please say hello to the family for me.
Of course, I will. I will.